What if I told you that in just 48 hours, one decision pushed North America to the edge of an economic war? Not with China, not with Russia, but between two countries that have stood side by side for over 200 years. This isn't just another political story, and it's definitely not just about trade policy. This is a moment that could redefine global power, reshape alliances, and change the way the world looks at the United States forever. Because right now, something extraordinary is unfolding between Donald Trump and Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and almost no one is explaining just how serious this really is. It started quietly, almost unnoticed, and then suddenly, without warning, the Trump administration pulled the trigger on one of the most aggressive trade weapons in American history, Section 301, a legal tool that allows the president to act alone, without Congress, without international approval, and without any real checks and balances. And Trump didn't just use it, he aimed it directly at Canada, accusing the country of unfair trade practices related to digital taxes, dairy protections, and environmental regulations. On paper, it might sound technical, even boring, but the reality is anything but. This move gives Trump the authority to impose tariffs of up to 60% on nearly everything Canada exports to the United States: cars, oil, aluminum, lumber, and more. It's the kind of economic pressure usually reserved for geopolitical rivals, not trusted allies. But the real shock came from what followed. Behind the scenes, executive actions were rolled out that froze certain Canadian assets, suspended visas for Canadian business sectors, and even threatened American companies working with Canadian firms. At that point, this stopped looking like trade policy and started to feel like something much more aggressive: economic warfare. And then came the response that no one in Washington was prepared for. Within just 6 hours, Mark Carney went on national television, not through a spokesperson, not in a press conference, but directly addressing the people. And he delivered a message that echoed far beyond Canada's borders. Canada will not be bullied. That moment alone shifted the entire tone of the conflict. But what came next changed the game entirely. Carney didn't try to calm things down. He didn't signal weakness. He counterattacked, invoking a rarely used emergency law that allows Canada to control and even restrict critical national assets. And then he named them: energy exports to the United States, strategic minerals, Great Lakes water systems, and Canadian airspace. In a single move, Canada effectively placed its hand on the switch to key parts of the American economy and made it clear that if the United States escalated further, that switch could be turned off. This is where the story stops being political and starts becoming dangerous, because for the first time in decades, the US-Canada relationship isn't just strained, it's unstable. To understand how we got here, you have to look beyond the headlines and focus on something deeper: leverage. For years, the assumption was simple: the United States holds all the power. It has the largest economy, the strongest military, and global influence that few countries can match. But this crisis is exposing a different reality. Take energy, for example. Every single day, Canada sends roughly 4 million barrels of oil to the United States, accounting for nearly half of all U.S. oil imports. Entire regions of America depend on this supply to heat homes, power industries, and keep transportation systems running. For decades, this relationship was considered untouchable, too important to disrupt. But Carney challenged that assumption, and here's why his move is so strategic. Canada has spent the last several years quietly preparing for this exact scenario. It has built new pipelines to the Pacific, signed long-term agreements with Asian markets, and expanded its refining capabilities. While the United States focused inward, Canada diversified outward. So when Carney hinted at restricting energy exports, it wasn't a bluff. It was a calculated signal backed by real alternatives. The markets understood that immediately. Oil prices surged, gas prices spiked, utility companies issued warnings, and governors from multiple U.S. states began calling Washington in a panic. Suddenly, the country that thought it had control realized it might not. And energy is just the first layer of this power shift. The second layer is even more critical: minerals. The modern world runs on materials like lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements, which are essential for everything from smartphones and electric vehicles to advanced military systems. Canada is one of the largest suppliers of these resources, and not just for consumer goods, but for the U.S. military industrial complex itself. When Carney announced a review of mineral exports, it triggered alarm bells inside the Pentagon because this isn't just about economics anymore, it's about national security. Imagine factories slowing down, defense production being delayed, and supply chains collapsing, all because of a trade dispute that didn't need to happen. Then there's airspace, a factor most people never think about, but one that plays a massive role in global logistics. The most efficient flight paths between the United States and both Europe and Asia pass directly through Canada. Hundreds of flights depend on this every day, from passenger travel to cargo shipments to military operations. If access to that airspace is restricted, flights become longer, more expensive, and in some cases, economically unviable. Airlines have already calculated the potential damage, up to $40 billion in annual losses. And suddenly, this isn't just about government decisions anymore. It's about everyday consequences: higher ticket prices, delayed shipments, and rising costs for consumers. This is how pressure builds, not in abstract policy debates, but in real, tangible disruptions to daily life. And as this pressure mounted, the global reaction revealed something even more surprising. Financial markets didn't just react, they took sides. U.S. markets dropped sharply, with major indices losing ground and key industries like airlines, energy, and manufacturing taking heavy hits. Banks saw massive losses as investors began to fear systemic risks. But while all this was happening, Canada's markets stabilized. Its currency strengthened, and investors began shifting confidence toward Canada. That's a moment that should not be underestimated. When the United States initiates economic pressure and the markets respond by backing the other side, it signals a deeper shift in perception. Meanwhile, inside the United States, the political fallout began to grow. States that depend heavily on trade with Canada, like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, started pushing back, not quietly, but publicly. Their economies are deeply connected to Canadian resources and trade flows, and the potential disruption threatened jobs, industries, and local stability. Polls began to show increasing opposition among Americans, not driven by ideology, but by economic concern. Because when prices rise, when jobs are at risk, and when uncertainty spreads, people pay attention. At the same time, Carney made another strategic move that could have long-term consequences. He began reaching out to global leaders, Europe, Asia, and beyond, positioning Canada as a stable and reliable partner. New trade discussions began, supply chains started to shift, and for the first time in decades, the idea of a global system less dependent on the United States started to feel real. This is what makes the situation so significant, because America's global strength has always been about more than just power. It has been about centrality. The world economy flows through the United States, and its alliances reinforce that position. But now, that central role is being questioned. Legally, the situation is also becoming more complex. Agreements like the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement and global frameworks under the World Trade Organization are being tested, and experts suggest that this move could violate both. That means potential legal battles, prolonged disputes, and further uncertainty. But beyond the legal and economic aspects, the real danger lies in something less visible: trust. Trust between allies is what holds systems together, and once it begins to break, the consequences extend far beyond a single conflict. Countries start to hedge their bets, diversify their partnerships, and reduce reliance on unpredictable relationships. That process has already begun. Now the situation stands at a critical crossroads. Both sides are locked into positions that are difficult to reverse. Donald Trump has built his political identity around strength and dominance, making it hard for him to step back without appearing weak. Mark Carney, on the other hand, has positioned himself as a defender of Canadian sovereignty, making retreat equally costly. The best case scenario is de escalation through quiet negotiations and face saving compromises, allowing stability to return. But the worst case scenario is escalation: tariffs being implemented, resources being restricted, prices rising, and economic pain spreading across both countries. If that happens, the consequences could extend far beyond North America. Supply chains could collapse, energy markets could destabilize, and global alliances could shift in ways that reshape international power dynamics. The world is watching closely, and every country is learning from this moment. If the United States can turn against Canada, its closest ally, then no relationship is guaranteed. That realization changes behavior, encouraging countries to diversify, build alternatives, and reduce dependence. This is how influence erodes, not suddenly, but gradually, through a series of decisions that push partners away. And that's what makes this moment so historic. It's not just about a trade dispute or a political conflict. It's about the future of global stability, the reliability of alliances, and the direction of economic power in the years to come. Because in just 48 hours, a stable and predictable relationship transformed into a high stakes confrontation with global consequences. And now, the next move, whether it leads to resolution or escalation, could define the next decade.